First of all, I can't even watch The View because I have a smart TV. It won't play it.
Welcome to the BJ Show. Let's rock and roll. Rock and roll. Come on, everybody. Let's lose control. Brand John never wants to follow. Yeah, ready for the ride. It's the BJ Show. BJ Show.
It's John, and he's back.
It's so great to be back with you, Brad. It was such a joy to hear your voice this morning.
Yeah, I bet it was. John?
It really was. I'm serious.
John took some time off last week, and what a week to take off, or Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, because all sorts of crazy stuff happened. I mean, all sorts of crazy stuff, but in this election cycle, every day is new crazy time, right?
That's exactly right. And you didn't shoot anybody, right?
I didn't shoot anybody, no.
Okay, that's good. You weren't shooting at any metal targets from 10 yards away. That's good.
That's one of the things we missed last week, which was so bizarre. Okay, that's John Combest, C-O-M-B-E-S-T. I spell his name because you need to plug it in the computer, johncombest.com. That's his site. Every single day he puts up interesting stuff, 20, 30, 40 different articles, and essentially it's like the old Drudge Report, but for the state of Missouri. I don't mean to sound like old, but that's essentially how you model it, correct? Way back in the day?
That's exactly right. That was the model by which I built it.
So what he does is he puts these links up that he thinks are interesting, that can keep you informed about Missouri government, politics, all sorts of interesting stuff, not necessarily government all the time, but some interesting stories about Missouri. And what we do is we start off the show, you know what, I got to do something different too, because I changed some stuff around. Let me see if this is going to work. We start off the show with this guy.
Now on with a countdown.
That works. And what does he do? He counts them down. And we start off with...
In third place...
Few stories from over the weekend, Brad. The first one has to do with cannabis. Now, you and I talk a lot about how much money cannabis, marijuana sales, bring into the state of Missouri. First, it was medical marijuana, and then it was recreational, also known as adult use. But, Brad, what we haven't talked about much excuse me, is the profit aspect of this and whether or not these companies are profitable. And maybe a canary in the coal mine, so to speak, over the weekend. The Post-Dispatch has a story by a woman named Dana Reek, and the headline is, St. Louis Cannabis Company owes more than $22 million, lawsuit says. The long and short of it is that a company based here in St. Louis, based here in Missouri, took out a $16 million loan in September 2021. You know, Brad, that was a year before the big vote for cannabis legalization. And it turns out these folks haven't been able to make their payments. And eventually, they weren't even able to make the payments on just their interest. The name of the company is Blue Arrow, Missouri. Now, I bring up this one specific company as an example, Brad, because Miss Reek in the story points out Forbes reporting that said that only about 27% of cannabis companies in the entire United States are profitable. About 40% said they broke even, and about 32% said they were not profitable. So, Brad, you and I talk about, and we joke a lot about driving past these dispensaries, and we see the drive-through dispensaries, and everywhere we go, people are token up. But the financial aspect of it doesn't seem as pretty, Brad. And what I would expect, excuse me, as we go forward, I would expect more and more of these companies that are very young to continue to default on their loans, not be able to make their payments, and then, of course, joyously be scooped up by bigger, giant conglomerates who can make a quick buck in the marijuana industry.
Yeah, but a couple of questions there. Is that legal under the state of Missouri? I thought we had this thing where we had to have so many, diverse ownership and things like that. Wouldn't there like things that spelled that out?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm sure there's rules by which you would acquire or sell the license, but you can trade the licenses and you can sell them once you have them. I think there's restrictions on some of those handout contracts, like some of the minority ones, but most of the general contracts, I think you can sell them at will.
Okay, so they're bringing in all this record money. Matter of fact, remember we talked about the fact. I guess it's been some months ago that we talked about the fact that the state of Missouri had targets as to what they thought the cannabis industry was going to bring in, and they were like double the estimates.
Yes.
Were like, I can't remember what it is. The estimates were like $1 billion, and they say I can't remember the numbers. But remember we talked about that, the fact that Missouri says, well, the cannabis industry is going to bring in X, and they brought in 2X. Why are these guys not profitable? Is the operating expenses too high? I mean, what is it to the point where they don't do their business plan correctly? To the point where they're doing sales, but they're not cracking the nuts, so to speak?
Yeah, my guess is that they're just poor operators, Brad. And I think in this cannabis space, you've seen people that are professionals that might have started in other states, folks who were really pros at this and making a living doing this. And Brad, I would compare this to your industry, and I would also compare it to maybe the restaurant industry. Everybody thinks that they could take a radio station and make it a big hit. Everybody thinks that they could buy a restaurant space and have a hot new place in town where everybody wants to hang out. And then you actually buy that restaurant space and you have to start paying the bills. Then you buy that radio station and you think, wow, there's a whole lot of fees that go into running this station. And in my estimation, when you open this up to quote unquote entrepreneurs to buy a license and actually operate a business, this isn't just hanging out with your friends and trying new strains of marijuana. This is actually balancing a checkbook and dealing with supply chain issues and dealing with regulation and things like that. And my guess is, Brad, a lot of these folks were just wholly unprepared of the realities of running a business.
Interesting. Okay, that's story number 3. Number 2.
Up a notch to number 2.
A headline that might excite people who don't like DEI. This story was brought to us by KCUR over in Kansas City. The headline, Brad, reads, UMKC becomes latest public university to close its diversity and inclusion office. Now, if you're against DEI, you'd see this and think, wow, this is a great victory. But when you dig a little bit deeper, Brad, you see that the central office at UMKC only had, according to them, 1.5 full-time employees. And then you dig a little bit deeper and you see that all the programs and all the initiatives that were happening in this DEI office are just being spread to other offices. They're calling it a decentralization, a decentralized model of DEI. So in other words, when there's the annual Women of Color Leadership Conference, that's just been moved over to the Department of External Relations and Constituent Engagement. They're still going to be doing on-demand inclusion training. And then they're still going to be doing the Martin Luther King Jr. lecture series and the Cesar Chavez lecture series. These are just being moved to other departments. So, Brad, this underscores something that you and I have talked about before, which is when you end a DEI office, but you don't really end the programs and the people still work there, are you really killing DEI or are you just reshuffling the deck? You know what I mean?
Well, what are you going to say? I mean, yeah, you're exactly right. It's still, but no matter what, you're still going to have this at the university level because, that's just the way universities operate.
Yes.
They live in their own little world that they don't realize is not they're a real world. It's just like, I say this all the time. I was taught this years ago. You've heard the popular saying, knowledge is power, okay? I went to a seminar once, and a guy says, he says, let me tell you this saying. You've heard this before, knowledge is power. He says that was BS, and he didn't, use the initials. He said, if that were the case, the richest people in the world will all be university professors. And you're thinking about he's exactly right. His point was application of knowledge is power, and that the professors, and not making fun of professors at universities, for the most part, they don't apply their knowledge. They just are living their little bubble, and they teach their classes, and they go on sabbatical, and they have a great life, and they have a pension, and they retire, and they support Kamala Harris all the time, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Now, what I know we can look forward to, Brad, this had to do with UMKC. I'm sure we can expect a story about UMSL's DEI office to come from St. Louis Public Radio, right? I'm sure they're working on it right now.
You are an optimist. Okay. Is that time for number 1?
It is.
The number 1.
Ameren's newly shuttered coal plant, Brad, in Jefferson County Bryce Gray of the Post-Dispatch asks yesterday, can the newly shuttered coal plant find new life? Other coal sites have. You and I talk a lot about Ameren, and we talk about renewable fuels, and we talk about the old coal-powered fuel or the old coal-powered electricity plants, Brad. But what will happen to Rush Island? Bryce Gray breaks down what might actually happen to the land. And in short, nobody's making a bid for it yet. Ameren hasn't said exactly what's going to happen to it, Brad. Now, the good news is the employees at this facility have been engaged, the ones that will be losing their jobs, have been engaged in tearing down the plant. They have kind of some, I guess you could call them make-work jobs, Brad, to really deconstruct the plant as it gets offline and sends its last bit of electricity into the grid. And the good thing is a number of those workers have actually found jobs at other Ameren coal plants. But Bryce Gray breaks down what can happen, and he points to a site in Illinois about 2 hours north of St. Louis where that plant, Brad, hasn't found any other use. In fact, that plant has been on the market for about a decade, and it has had some really negative effects on the town. And really the worries here, Brad, the worst case scenario is that nobody comes in, acquires this site, and that the local school district won't get all that Ameren money that it's so used to getting. So the folks in town in Jefferson County are offering some positive comments. They're being optimistic. A gentleman from the area says, it's not a one-horse town, and if Ameren closes, that's it. I don't see this being a sad story where the schools will collapse. But it does remind us, Brad, and this big push to solar and wind and all these other energy forms, what happens to a community when you force the closure of these plants?
Well, the problem that I still don't understand, and, maybe, I this is like beating a dead horse, but I keep saying, okay, we have the federal government right now, which is really starting to cram down the the electrification of our lives. They don't want us to have gas ranges, gas stoves, or gas water heaters, or gas furnaces, or any kind of natural gas. They don't want us to have gasoline or diesel-powered cars. They want everything with electricity. Okay, but yet here's a perfect example. Here's a power plant that goes offline that was supplying, power to the St. Louis area and beyond, the way the grid works. They're not replacing that. So if electric usage goes up, where's it going to come from? Because, you can say all you want about solar power and wind power. Wind power is not practical in the St. Louis area. The only windmill I know that's in the entire St. Louis area is right there at Page and 170, the Alberici Construction Company. If you know the story behind that, that's nothing but window dressing because of the fact that, the story behind that, John?
Oh, yeah, I do. I visited that building before.
Right. And the reason that windmill is there is that gave them LEED's Platinum certification. And you know what that's about. But LEED's is some organization, LEEDS, isn't that what it is?
It's a certification organization.
Right, certification organization. And the interesting part of that was that they originally put up a used windmill when they originally built the building. I go, why did they put up a used? Because I knew a guy that worked on that project. I go, why'd you put up a used windmill? And he says it gave us extra points with the LEEDS Commission. And as soon as I'm going like, okay, this is stupid. You're just playing games with this now. And like a year later, they tore the one down and put a new one up. But once again, I don't know where the power's going to come from. I mean,
I just think, Brett, and not to interrupt you, but I think if we went to Pete Buttigieg, he would just say, we spent a couple $1 billion for every charging station and we'll be fine.
But and something,
we just have Jerome Powell print more money. I don't know what's so hard about that.
I think it was the smartest woman in the world that sent me this recently, that there was some EPA ranking of all the power plants around the country, and the Labadie plant out there in Franklin County, right across the river from Augusta, came out as one of the worst polluters in the country. Did you see that?
I didn't see the ranking of them as worse. No, thanks to the smartest woman in the world for that. I didn't see that.
Wasn't the worst, but it was up there as some of the worst polluting plants in the country. And I'm going like, okay, so if you shut that one down, then you got Portage de Sioux up there in far eastern St. Charles County, across the Missouri River from I guess it would be Godfrey and things like that. I mean, where's the power going to come from? It's just, the whole thing to me is I just don't get it. It's once again, it's to the point where you hear the reports of the car manufacturers are slowly but surely weaning themselves off of the total electric vehicles, and they're going, I guess you could say, back to hybrids, because you know what the reason for that is? I read an interesting article about that.
I don't know, but it's a smart hedge, isn't it, in this environment?
Well, it's a mental thing because of the fact that people are afraid of the range. They call it range anxiety. In other words, if you get in your electric vehicle and you've got to drive to, let's say, Jefferson City, and your dashboard says you have 200 miles of range, you go like, okay, well, I can make it there, but I'm going to have to charge on the way back. But at least with a hybrid, in other words, you always have, it's like a backup power source. You can.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
You can start out on all electric, but as you deplete the battery, the engine kicks in and essentially takes over. And if your battery is totally depleted, you still have, a power plant being the gasoline engine. But of course, we can't have hybrids because, oh my God, even though they are so much more fuel efficient, they still use that nasty fossil fuel.
Oh, it's disgusting, Brad.
I just don't get it, John. Okay, John, lots of stuff. A little bit quick, we went through there. I've got a list of all the stuff, and you already talked about the one. Let's start off with the Lucas Kunce thing. That is so bizarre. I mean, and
he did not take gun safety training from Brad Hildebrand's son or Brad Hildebrand or Elmer Fudd, maybe Tim Walz.
Okay.
Maybe he came from the Tim Walz School of Firearms.
I am not the gun expert, okay? I mean, I have my concealed carry, went through the classes, and I do a lot of online training. I watch a lot of videos, and, you can learn a lot from things like that. I'm not the expert, but when you hear some of the comments about what they were doing, I mean, even the neophyte would go like, okay, they were doing what? I mean, it's just...
Yeah, it's outrageous. And when you look at the setup that the reporters took a picture of, there have been some folks, I'm sure you've seen this, Brad, where folks went through and circled all the problems with that setup.
Exactly.
And why it's just ridiculous to think that would be safe.
That's what I'm saying. I'm not the expert, but I saw some of these things and I thought to myself, okay, we'll talk about it next break. Okay, we have to take a break. And by the way, I should put in a plug for this. We do this show live, 7 to 8 a.m. Central Standard Time. Pretty soon we'll be moving into Daylight Standard Time. But we do this show live, and you can listen to us streaming. You can go to egbert.com, or you can go to bjshow.com, click on the link, and we'll take you to the stream. Or if you're listening to the recorded show via the podcast or the YouTube channel, don't forget, you can listen to it live and then you listen to it later.
Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's Combest, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?